Welcome back, everybody, and today we are returning to our big book nook series, and we're going to be painting up an Illithid. I think it's supposed to be Cthulhu, but we're going the purple route here. As the title indicated, we're going to paint this in roughly 2 hours, and rather than just explain what you're seeing on the screen, I'm going to explain the process here. I'm going to be using a technique that I am dubbing layering washes. Before we get to that, we have to start off with our base coat, because we are going to be working from light to dark here. We can't go lighter than our base coat, so we want a very light base coat. Going to use beige red, and then over that dry brushing about a 50-50 mix of beige red and pale sand. And this mixture I'm concentrating a bit stronger around the eye and the underside of the tentacles. In case you're wondering why I am not using an airbrush here, the reason for that is because the paint goes on much thicker if you use a regular brush, and we need a good, strong base coat here because we're going to be using a lot of washes, and airbrushed paint just gets damaged much easier. From here, we can begin the layering wash process, and this is a very freestyle type of painting, as you're about to see. We simply begin with the lightest color possible, and as we progress, we're going to move on to darker and darker colors. Now, the reason I call this the layering wash method is it's not because it's a new technique. I just think it better describes what's happening here to you so you more easily understand. The process is much like layering. We have very thin, transparent paint that we're putting on the figure. Usually we use layering to lighten. In this case, we're using it to darken. However, layering, I tend to dry off the brush a bit more, and it's done with more accuracy than we're doing here. It's also kind of like a wash, the way I'm applying more paint mixture than normal. However, a wash, we're not completely flooding the area like with a wash, and I'm not trying to get the paint just in the recesses. I'm trying to more get it all over. So it's kind of a combination of the two techniques into one. Just to give you an idea of what we're doing. Slowly building up the colors like we would with layering, but being a little bit more free with our application. I hate to use the word chaotic because there is a somewhat method to the madness here, but just a bit more freestyle. Because we are putting so much moisture onto the base coat, we do run the risk of accidentally pulling up the base coat. I actually did that in one spot where I started to pull up the beige red. If that happens, don't try to fix it. Just stop, let everything completely dry, and then you can fix it later on. One thing I'm doing here to avoid that and also speed up the paint time is moving to different areas of the miniature. So trying to paint kind of the major skin areas, then let that dry, and then I'm moving into what I'm calling the more tender areas, which is the underside of the tentacle and around the eyeball. So hopefully by now you have a general idea of what I'm doing here. I'm slowly building up the layers. You see me doing a lot of stippling. I'm doing that so we can avoid brush strokes. We have a broken pattern that we're applying rather than straight lines. But we build up the color. Usually it could be 1 to 2 coats, sometimes 3. Really depends on what the color is and what I'm trying to achieve and the opacity of the paint. But just building up the color, and then we switch to another color, never allowing the previous coat to get opaque. That's another difference from standard layering here. We want it more like a wash, where we can see the previous layer applied and just tint it, in this case, darker. This is a really nice technique, especially on organic pieces like this where you have skin, because worst thing you want to do, whatever you're painting skin, is have it just all one solid color. Ends up looking like a plastic Barbie doll or something like that. So little nuances of skin, color changes in skin, little spots, little variations. I always say just look at the back of your hand. You'll see all little bits of color and whatnot. So adding a little blue here and there. Later on, you're going to see me add some green and even add some yellow. Just adding a whole bunch of different colors, as long as we're not covering up the previous layer. That's the one bad thing that can happen with this technique. If you get a little bit too carried away and basically go too dark, it's pretty much impossible to re-lighten the miniature unless you start all from scratch. And here we are, as I said, adding a little bit of yellow ochre to our scheme, deciding those tender areas. I think I want a slight bit of a yellow tint there. So very, very thin, basically a glaze here, just to tint that a little bit onto the yellow side. You can get away with that as long as you don't go too dark. You can add all sorts of colors. With a piece of this size, shading and highlighting it is not a huge concern. All the colors that I'm adding here is more for color variation and not for light and shadow. About the only layer added for shadow is this one. Because our creature here is coming out of a frame, I need to darken those areas to really show some depth. But this is pretty much the only thing that's done for actual shadow. And I thought for a moment, hey, let's add a little bit of green. Decided to go very soft with it. I was going to put on more of it, but realized that might be going a little bit too far. But just spots of it. Again, here and there, little color variations really adds to the piece. Moving on to the suckers. By the way, I hate painting octopus suckers because no one can sculpt them correctly. Suckers are supposed to be more of a subtle kind of saucer shape thing, and everyone sculpts them as like Cheerios, so we can't paint them as realistic suckers. That's why I'm going dark in the center of the suckers rather than doing an off-white or a white like octopus suckers should be. And because I reversed it, this is pretty much the only regular layering on this figure, at least on the skin portion. Decided to come up with a mix after trying a few different things to try to make the suckers look more realistic. Failed. So I had to go back and lighten them back up just using some texture and a 3-color combo to lighten those little suckers up. And that's it for a majority of the work on the skin. Like I said, it went really fast. I did add a few other oddball colors here and there, a little blue, a little more red, things I didn't show you on camera. There's lots of very small additions. Didn't want to cover all of them because I think it'd just be too confusing, but there's a lot more colors in here than what you see. Moving on to the big ass eyeball, and beginning with several very thin layers of pale sand. We have a very smooth surface area here, so we need very thin paint to slowly build up to a off-white color without any brush strokes. Originally I was just going to leave it white, but on second thought I decided to go with more of a yellow as our main color for our eye, and did kind of a rough brushing of it. I tried to smooth that as well, and then I said, you know what, the heck with it, let's stipple this eyeball. So basically I'm going to stipple this whole thing, and the idea is to have a more of a yellow color in the center, and then moving out to a light green and then a darker green, and then near black around the edges, but have those colors intermixed a little bit. So the very dark green we use on the edges, for example, that's going to kind of bleed into the central area of the eye. What I'm trying to paint here is matching a picture I found online. I think it was a frog. I can't remember. Sure, it was some sort of amphibian. And it didn't occur to me until recording this just now. I never bothered to look up what an octopus eye looks like. I saw that frog eye and decided to go with that. Also, using a bright green eye with all the purple we have on this figure is not something I would normally recommend, but it's such a central piece of this piece. I wanted something that would stand out from the rest of the model. If I was painting this in a smaller scale, I'd probably go with blue eyes or red eyes or something that better matches the purple, but in this case, went with green. It's not technically the correct color. I'm using air quotes here, but it does what I want it to do. So basically at this point, I finished the rest of the model. I hit everything with a gloss varnish for extra protection because this is more of a piece that's going to get handled. And then I hit it with a flat varnish, and then actually went back and hit it with a semi-gloss because figured it's a lot of skin. It can use a little bit of gloss. And then I mixed up some epoxy glue. Now you can use epoxy glue if you want a super glossy surface, and I have used it before on miniatures. It tends to be too glossy, but again, drawing attention to the eye here, I didn't have any regular epoxy resin or super glossy any sort of thing that I could put on here, so I decided to go with the glue. Now this is a little difficult to apply. It does flatten out very well, but it's also rather thick. I have some tape on the side there to prevent any drippage because, as you can imagine, if I slip at this stage, there's no going back. You can't clean this stuff off once you've put it in place. And honest, I never would have tried this if it wasn't for the fact that there's quite a big lip between the eyeball and the eyelid area. So that managed to catch any flowing resin and just trap it there and create a very nice edge. And there you go, one Illithid book nook. Again, this took roughly 2 hours to paint, and it's a very fun style. I really enjoy this layering, wash, whatever you want to call it, method. Again, it's very freestyle. You're just adding all the colors you want. Just the key is to remember not to go overboard. Make sure your paint is thin enough. You do not want an opaque paint to cover up all the little nuances of color that you put in. Keep your colors thin, slowly build them up, change to different colors, and just add bits of color here and there. Great for organic pieces like this. So I hope you give it a shot yourself. Hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
There was a time so bright and gay, it seems like only yesterday, when I held your brain in my arms.